Passingham's view of the person is a holistic view that sees a person as more than their physical parts that we can explain. Overall, he doesn't refute neurology or that the brain can explain behavior, but just the claim that it can explain everything about people and their behavior. He views people as a bigger organism of parts. His view is a concise way of saying we are both neurology or biology and our environment. In the lens of psychology, this is a way of saying he believes in both nature versus nurture, which is essentially asking what environmental factors and what biological factors make up a person's cognition and behavior. Passingham's argument goes as follows. 1. If neurology tells us everything there is to know about human persons, then human persons are simply their brains. 2. If human beings are organisms with embodied features in addition to the brain that are influenced by their social environment, then human persons are not simply their brains. 3. Human beings are organisms with embodied features in addition to the brain that are influenced by their social environment. 4. Therefore, neurology doesn't tell us everything there is to know about the human persons. Taking this line by line to determine the soundness and validity, I interpreted the first line as being if A, then B. I feel like this premise is setting up for the hypothetical argument he's trying to make. I don't think there's much you can argue for or against here because this premise is essentially him setting a hypothetical definition of neurology. And I feel that this hypothetical premise is valid according to its own definitions. The second line I interpreted as meaning if C, then not B. This premise I feel is similar to the last. The first part of this premise is essentially a definition which posits what a human being is. This definition refutes or does not go with the idea that human persons are simply their brains, which is the second half of the premise. And I feel that this hypothetical premise is valid according to its own definitions. The next line is C. This premise is essentially stating what he believes human persons to be. I feel like this premise is valid because we have many explanations of why we are more than our brain, and we have examples that show environmental and social factors as well as embodied features in a human person, or on a human person. For example, hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism are conditions in which the thyroid either makes too much or too little T3 hormone, and has effects on mood and mental health even though it won't be apparent in the brain. Therefore, A does not equate to B. The way I interpreted his argument felt valid via both modus ponens and modus tollens. Starting at lines 2 through 3, we use modus ponens to deduce not B. Using not B, we use modus tollens with line 1 to make a valid argument. Overall, I feel like his argument is sound and I agree with his take on the human person. There are a lot of things neurology can and can't explain about ourselves or the human person. We can't look at a brain scan and say that a specific memory is located in this hyperspecific part of the brain. We also can't with 100% certainty know how someone perceives an objective event. While brain waves can explain movement and that we have thoughts and a lot of other things about the brain, it doesn't necessarily tell us fully what they are about. For example, we could do an experiment where we might show participants something that might make them feel negatively, and an area of the brain might light up. While the image tells us, yes, this person doesn't like, for this example, let's just say puppies. It doesn't necessarily tell us why they perceive puppies as a negative stimuli in the brain. That's where psychology fills in for where neurology lacks an understanding or description of an event. While we know they don't like puppies because of what area of the brain lights up when they see the stimuli, we don't know why they perceive puppies as negative. Another example is that brain scans have their own problems. Some are only measuring the movement of blood in the brain, which doesn't describe the entirety of certain relationships in the brain. Some scans have bad resolution and we can't entirely isolate all individual areas of the brain being affected. However, while these scans aren't perfect, they still tell us stuff we need to know about the brain, and they help us make logical inferences about cognition and behavior. The brain and neurology isn't useless for understanding human persons, it just doesn't offer an exhaustive explanation of the human person and their cognitive and behavioral features.